I want to ask you something. Why did doctors spend 50 years us that fat was killing us? Why did we remove fat from food? Why did we eat low-fat everything? Low-fat yogurt, low salad dressing, low-fat cheese that tasted like cardboard. Why did an entire generation of parents pack their kids' lunches based on guidelines that said, fat is the enemy? Because scientists told us to. Specifically, because a landmark paper published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1960-67 reviewed all the available evidence and concluded definitively, dietary fat causes heart disease. Sugar is not a significant factor. That paper was cited thousands of times. It shaped U.S. dietary guidelines. It changed what billions of people ate for the next 5 decades. In 2016, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco, found documents buried in an archive in Illinois. Those documents showed that the scientists who wrote that paper had been paid to write it, and the people who paid them told them exactly what conclusion they needed to reach. This is not a conspiracy theory. The documents exist. They were published in JAMA Internal Medicine, one of the most respected medical journals in the world. What I'm about to tell you is documented fact, and it may be the most consequential scientific fraud of the 20th century. To understand what happened, you need to go back to the 1950s, to a genuine scientific debate that was playing out in nutrition research. Heart disease was killing Americans at unprecedented rates. The medical community wanted to know why. 2 theories emerged. The first came from a physiologist named Ancel Keys. His theory, dietary fat, specifically saturated fat, raised cholesterol, which clogged arteries and caused heart attacks. Keys was charismatic, aggressive, and politically connected. He helped shape early American Heart Association guidelines and had the ear of major medical publications. The second came from a British physiologist named John Yudkin. His theory, the culprit wasn't fat, it was sugar. Yudkin had a decade of research showing that high sugar consumption correlated with heart disease, obesity, and metabolic dysfunction, ways that fat consumption didn't. His 9,172 book was called Pure, White, and Deadly. It was a real scientific dispute. Both men had data. Both had legitimate arguments. The kind of debate that, in a healthy scientific ecosystem, gets resolved by more research, independent replication, and honest review. That's what happened. Instead, Ancel Keys mounted a vicious public campaign against Yudkin. He called Yudkin's work a mountain of nonsense. He wrote dismissive reviews of his research. He used his institutional influence to push Yudkin's findings out of mainstream journals and his name out of mainstream discourse. Yudkin's reputation was effectively destroyed. His theory was buried. And Keys's fat hypothesis became the dominant framework that shaped a generation of dietary science. It was only decades later that researchers began asking, who was helping Keys win? In 2016, Kristen Kearns, a researcher at the University of California, San Francisco, was going through archives at the University of Illinois when she found something that shouldn't have been there. Internal correspondence of an organization called the Sugar Research Foundation. The SRF was the research arm of the American sugar industry. And memos, letters, financial records covered the years 959 to 1971. What was systematic? In 1964, the sugar industry commissioned a review of the emerging research linking sugar to heart disease. Their internal reports concluded that the evidence was, in their words, a mountain of trouble. Sugar was looking increasingly implicated, and they needed to do something about it. What they did was fund science. In 1965, the SRF initiated Project 226, a literature review of dietary fat and heart disease. They selected 3 Harvard scientists to conduct it, including the chair of Harvard's nutrition department. They paid them the equivalent of approximately $50,000 in today's money. The documents show the SRF explicitly selecting the research to be reviewed. They sent the scientists a bibliography of studies to include. Studies that supported the fat hypothesis were in. Studies that implicated sugar were excluded. When an early draft didn't sufficiently downplay the sugar evidence, the scientists revised it. The final paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967 under the scientists' names alone. No disclosure of funding. No disclosure of the Sugar Research Foundation's role. The journal did not require such disclosures at the time. A gap in scientific ethics that the sugar industry was apparently well aware of. The paper concluded that reducing dietary fat was the key to preventing heart disease. Sugar warranted no particular concern. It was, to use the precise term, a purchased conclusion. And for 50 years, it held here's where the story stops being history and starts being about your life specifically. The 1967 paper and the body of industry-influenced research that followed it fed directly into official U.S. dietary guidelines. In 1980, the first edition of the USDA Dietary Guidelines, Americans told the nation, eat less fat, eat more carbohydrates. The food industry heard that as a business opportunity. If fat was the enemy, you could charge a premium for removing it. Low-fat versions of everything flooded the market. Low-fat yogurt, low-fat crackers, low-fat salad dressing, low-fat cookies. The problem was simple chemistry. When you remove fat from food, it tastes terrible. Carries flavor. Without it, food becomes bland and unsatisfying. The solution the food industry found was sugar. Remove the fat, add sugar. The products tasted good again. The packaging said low fat. The consumer assumed it was healthy. Nobody was required to point out that the fat, which the evidence increasingly suggested was not the primary problem, had been replaced with the thing that increasingly looked like it was. Between 1970 and 2000, American per capita sugar consumption increased by approximately 25%. High fructose corn syrup, introduced at scale in the 1970s, was cheap and sweet and went into almost everything. The obesity rate in America, which had been relatively stable for decades, began climbing in the late 1970s. By 2000, it had nearly doubled. By 2023, over 40% of American adults were classified as obese. The type 2 diabetes rate tracked it almost exactly. In 1960, roughly 1% of Americans had type 2 diabetes. Today it is over 11%, with another 38% classified as prediabetic. These are not independent trends. They are a single trend with a single cause. A food supply that was systematically redesigned around the wrong enemy, guided by guidelines shaped by corrupted science. Here's the part that should stop you cold. The Sugar Research Foundation did not invent this playbook. In 1954, the tobacco industry, facing emerging scientific evidence linking cigarettes to lung cancer, held a meeting at the Plaza Hotel in New York. What came out of that meeting was a strategy document that has since been called one of the most cynical in corporate history. It committed the tobacco industry to manufacturing doubt, funding alternative research, casting uncertainty on the emerging consensus, and keeping the public confused long enough to keep selling cigarettes. Internal tobacco documents, released as part of a 1998 legal settlement, showed exactly how this worked. The industry didn't need to prove smoking was safe. They just needed to keep the science controversial. As long as there was debate, there was doubt. As long as there was doubt, there were sales. The sugar industry used the same strategy, drew up the same notes, and in several documented cases used the same PR firms and scientific consultants that the tobacco industry had pioneered the model with. This was not coincidence. It was as adoption of a proven method. The method works because it exploits the way science communicates uncertainty. Science never says proven beyond all doubt. It says the evidence strongly suggests. That natural epistemic humility, which is a feature of honest science, becomes a weapon in the hands of an industry that simply needs to keep the question open. I want to be precise here, because the full story is more complicated than sugar bad, fat good, case closed. Nutrition science is genuinely hard. Human diets are extraordinarily complex. Controlled experiments are difficult. And the record of confident dietary advice that later turned out to be wrong goes well beyond the fat hypothesis. It is a recurring feature of the field. Saturated fat is not entirely exonerated by modern research. Current evidence suggests it's more nuanced. The type of fat, the source, and what it replaces in the diet all matter. The picture is not simply fat is fine. What the documents do prove, specifically, is this. At a critical moment when scientific debate was genuinely open, one side of that debate was secretly funded by an industry with a financial stake in the outcome. The debate that should have happened, honestly, in the open, with full disclosure, didn't happen. One side bought the referee. Everything downstream of that corruption is contaminated. Not necessarily wrong. Contaminated. There is a difference. And that difference matters for how we evaluate 50 years of nutrition guidance that flowed from it. The documents exist. Kearns published them. The journal published her findings. This isn't disputed. What's less clear is the full accounting of what it cost. How many people changed how they ate because guidelines shaped by purchased science? How many cases of type 2 diabetes connect to a food supply redesigned around the wrong target? How many decades of medical advice to patients came downstream from a 1967 paper, whose conclusion had been determined before the review was written? We can't fully answer those questions. The variables are too many, the chains of causation too long. What we can say is this. The institutions that were supposed to protect the integrity of nutrition science, journals, universities, professional associations, failed. Not because they were all corrupt, but because the corruption that existed was patient, well-funded, and operating in a system that wasn't designed to catch it. That system hasn't fundamentally changed. The next time a major study lands, confidently telling you what to eat, what to avoid, what is killing you, the question worth asking is not just, what does the study say?